You know, I've been open about my manic depression, I would say almost since the day that I was diagnosed, and that's more than 25 years ago. For me, it was a fairly easy decision to talk about it. The people that I knew, my family, my doctors, they were all encouraging, and they were all supportive when I decided to make that decision. I would say that over the 25 years, certainly being open about mental illness has become far more common than it once was. Mental illness is a scary thing to most people. It's not like other kinds of illness. When you have heart disease or you have diabetes or something like that, people look at you with a certain kind of understanding. With mental illness, it's more confusion. It confounds people, and in some cases it terrifies. Remember, mental illness is still associated in the public with violence, associated with things like what happened in Newtown, Connecticut. So it's a different bar that you have to leap over in order to talk about it. Yeah, well, from the time that I was in graduate school, I had a pretty miserable time of it. I was depressed. I had a great deal of trouble when I was living overseas and studying. I came back and I went into therapy almost immediately, and that was helpful. Then I moved back to New York and I went into psychoanalysis. And 4 days a week I would visit a trained psychoanalyst and I would talk about my problems. And that went on for 2 years. And there were days when I was absolutely miserable. I would cry through the sessions. I would not be able really to function outside or inside the office. And you would have thought that that psychiatrist would have figured out that there was something beyond the normal problem there. But he was classically trained. He never insisted on medication. And one day I had what can only be described as a wildly psychotic manic episode. And yes, it took my family by surprise. It took me by surprise. I really didn't know what was going on, because when you're in the midst of one of those episodes, you really don't know where you are or what you're doing. By a stroke of luck, I contacted my parents. They came and they got me into the hospital. But it was a great shock. There's no doubt about it. The best moment of that whole period came when I was checked into the hospital. And I was delusional and raving and saying a lot of stuff that made absolutely no sense. And my mother watched me decompensate in front of her, which couldn't have been a very comfortable experience. And after I was taken away to be put into what turned into a room with a window that wouldn't open and padded walls, the nurse came out, the nurse who had admitted me, and she said to my mother, "Don't worry, we get them in here all the time like that. He'll be as good as new in a week." So from the beginning, I think they had hope that things would improve. But was it a shock? Oh yeah, it was a shock, a big shock. I also am extraordinarily lucky because I have what I would call a garden variety case, a case that really responds to medication. And over the years, I'm 55 now, I was 27 when I was diagnosed. Over the years, my chemical cocktail, as they call it, has changed, certainly, yes. You know, for a while I took Prozac, then I went on other drugs. Sometimes I take more of one drug and less of another. Certain things don't work. You substitute in, you substitute out. But generally speaking, I've been very lucky in that there's always been a good doctor to take care of me and a cocktail that seems to work. And that's unusual. I mean, I have not been in the mental hospital with a manic episode since 1988. 27 years, I think, something like that. And that's more than half my life. This is an illness that, as I said, it's cyclical, and it bounces people in and out of hospitals. And I think the combination of really good care, excellent doctors, and my own self-discipline when it comes to taking drugs and sticking to them has helped keep me out. Well, I've always said that the medications are necessary, and the medications are terrific. I feel very lucky to be part of a generation where the medications exist. In previous generations, they simply didn't, and people had to go without. And a lot of people's lives were ruined or wasted as a result of not having a medical solution to the problem. At the same time, I also believe that the medications only make people like me as miserable as everyone else in the world. They raise us to a certain point, but there's still a long way to go. And that's why you need different services and different other kinds of things to help you through life. For example, psychotherapy. For example, family services, support groups that people go to. Even things as simple as regular exercise can make a massive difference in whether somebody with manic depression or depression gets through a day or gets through a tough season. These are cyclical illnesses, right? One day you're doing better than the next. One season, for me, winter, is always worse than other seasons. So during the winter, I turn on a light on my desk that imitates sunlight, and it helps me make it through the winter. A person without the illness that I have doesn't need to do that kind of thing. But there's a panoply of things that are needed in order for someone with a mental illness to really get the best treatment possible. There's so many problems in both state and federal policies towards people with mental illness. I think if there was one thing I would focus on where money spent would get the greatest result for the most needy people, I would say it would be on the prison population. America's prisons are the largest chain of mental hospitals in the country. We warehouse people with mental illness in our prisons, and that's no way to treat it. They don't get adequate treatment. They cycle in and out from the streets to the cells, back to the streets, and nobody is looking after them. And I think that the amount of money we spend now to incarcerate those people would be far better spent on preventive measures to keep them from decompensating, from having mental health episodes, and then from committing crimes or going after the drugs that they need in order to medicate themselves. This is a terrible cycle that this country is in. And it's something where if we spend a lot of money, I believe we could make a lot of difference quickly and save money in the long run. And that's key, because the American people don't want to spend money on prisons and prisoners. And I understand that, neither do I. But if we spend the money up front, we'll save a lot of money in the long run. Another place that I would clearly spend money is on our veterans. The last 10, 12 years of wars have left people with post-traumatic stress disorder, have left people with terrible traumatic brain injuries. People are surviving in ways they never used to survive because of modern medicine. But when they come back, they ought to be given the same attention that they're given on the battlefield. There ought to be psychiatrists and psychologists and support groups and ways for these people to recover from what are horrible battle injuries. They're injuries you can't see in many cases, but they're no less real and they're no less dangerous. And they're dangerous not only to the person themselves, but to their families. The suicide rates are out of control among the military. And I think we owe it to that population to help them out. I would love to see people come away from this meeting committed to dealing with a population, a discrete population, and then being able to use a program to demonstrate that you can make a difference in treating mental illness. I still think there's a massive gap between what's possible, the potential that we have to control and manage these illnesses, and what we've demonstrated can be done in this country. If that were to be simply one program aimed at one state's prison system, that would seem to me to be a great conclusion. Because again, if you can demonstrate to people that a difference can be made, then I think you may be able to convince them over time not only to put resources into that, but to change their minds about the fundamental nature of things like the illness that I have. There's only so much good that people like me can do, right? When we speak up about our illnesses, when we say, look at me, look at my life, I'm okay, despite the fact that I've had to fight this illness. There are millions of people who have the kinds of illness that I have, who never get help. And I believe they not only deserve help, but they need help. And the entire population, way beyond that group, will profit from that.